100 years ago, the Titanic sank, tragically claiming over 1,500 lives. But a question that remains unanswered is, what happened with the lost bodies of the Titanic? Are there still any human remains in the wreck site? Where did they all magically disappear? And most of all, are the icy depths of the ocean concealing some facts that still remain unknown to the world? Let's dive deep into what happened to the bodies lost at sea with one of the most mysterious tragedies, the Titanic. The Titanic, ironically marketed as the unsinkable ship, tragically sank after hitting an iceberg on April 14, 1912. Only a third of the passengers survived, and out of the casualties, only 340 bodies were recovered. Despite being one of the largest and most luxurious ships of its time, the Titanic had an insufficient number of lifeboats to accommodate all passengers and crew. This was due to complaints about the untidy appearance of the deck. The Titanic's grandeur and luxury ultimately led to the tragic maiden voyage. One of the reasons for the ship's downfall was the absence of effective distress signals and the failure of nearby ships to see the Titanic's flares. This was blamed on light refraction, a phenomenon that reduces visibility. This might possibly explain why the ship's lookouts missed the iceberg. Another contributing factor was the absence of binoculars for the crew, but the truth is, they couldn't access them. Why? Because the key to the binocular cabinet was in the possession of Second Officer David Blair, who was unexpectedly replaced and completely forgot to hand over the key. Imagine the possibilities if those binoculars had been available. Perhaps, just perhaps, the crew would have spotted the iceberg in time, saving the Titanic from its icy demise. Besides, the Titanic was also traveling at a higher speed than recommended, as the ship's owner, White Star Line, aimed to impress the world by arriving ahead of schedule. And believe it or not, only 37 seconds are said to have elapsed from the time the iceberg was spotted until the collision. All these were factors that led the ship to its watery grave. Now, let's piece together the fragments of history to reveal the answer to the big question, what happened to the Titanic's lost souls? According to some Titanic experts, a severe storm on the night of the disaster scattered the passengers wearing life jackets across a 50-mile region, making it possible that the dead were also spread throughout the bottom. While other analysts believe hundreds of people were trapped aboard the ship when it sank, the condition of the bodies would depend on how they were exposed to oxygenated water currents over time, as well as the deep-sea organisms that feed on them. James Cameron, who directed the popular 1997 movie, spent more time aboard the Titanic than Captain Smith. He made over 30 dives to the ship and stated to the New York Times, "We've seen clothing, we've seen shoes, we've seen pairs of shoes," which would strongly suggest there was a body there at one point, but we've never seen any human remains. We might never know what became of the submerged bodies or their unheard stories. Unseen and unheard, the Titanic's lost bodies remain hidden. But then, what fate awaited the bodies that were eventually discovered? What events unfolded after the Titanic went down? While some recovered bodies were given a proper burial at sea or transported to Halifax, Nova Scotia to be buried by their loved ones, there were also other unidentified graves in cemeteries where victims were buried. After the Titanic sank and a massive search and rescue operation was launched, of the many ships that were sent to the disaster location were the Carpathia, Californian, Mackay Bennett, Minia, Montmagny, Algerine, and the CGS Acadia. The Mackay Bennett arrived at the wreck site on the 20th of April 1912 and recovered 306 bodies. Of those, 116 third-class passengers were buried at sea due to a lack of preservation supplies. She returned to the port of Halifax with about 190 bodies on board, including the body of John Jacob Astor IV, for whose recovery the crew split a reward of $100,000, a proof of the sharp contrast between the haves and the have-nots. The Titanic had a stark division between social classes, but the irony lies in the fact that in the face of the disaster, class distinctions became irrelevant as everyone faced the same fate. The recovery effort was brutal and often terrible due to the cold water and strong currents making finding and retrieving the bodies difficult. But what about the ones that managed to escape the tragedy? The horrible disaster that may have been avoidable claimed hundreds of lives, yet some people managed to escape unharmed and did their part to aid others, finding courage amidst chaos. Molly Brown, who was portrayed in James Cameron's film, actively helped rescue efforts and later organized assistance for second- and third-class survivors. She dedicated herself to philanthropic work, advocating for the education of the poor and women's rights. Lawrence Beasley, a second-class passenger, wrote a book about his experience on the Titanic, providing detailed accounts of the event. Violet Constance Jessup, a stewardess, survived not only the Titanic, but also the sinking of the HMHS Britannic, another ship owned by White Star Line. Dorothy Gibson, a famous American singer, model, and actress, escaped on one of the first lifeboats and later starred in a film based on the Titanic sinking, even wearing the same clothes she had worn on the night of the disaster. While many of the undiscovered corpses are still buried in the Titanic wreckage, the retrieval of those found offered a means to pay respect to the dead and honor their memories. The story of the unsinkable dream turned nightmare and her passengers and crew continue to captivate people all across the world. Feel free to share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching. We'll see you soon.